hard to get people to believe that it wasn't a suicide attempt.
Pat Young was in despair that she would ever be able to resolve the difficulties in her marriage. And so she shot herself and went to hell.
I knew it had to be something that would be drastic enough to put me in the hospital, but not drastic enough to kill me. So I didn't do my torso because I didn't want to do any serious damage. So I thought if it went in one side of my neck and out the other side, that would be bad enough to put me there, not bad enough to keep me there. I had no idea I would die. I was in a coma for 3 days on life support. They were positive I wasn't going to live. They had informed the family that they had lost too much blood. It started out with these little beings, child-sized creatures, grotesque, absolutely grotesque little creatures. And they took great delight in doing things. They would make holes in me. They would either shoot me or they would make holes by actually hitting me. And in these holes, they would put horrible things. Anything that was excrement, vomit, bile, anything that was absolutely obnoxious. And these holes were everywhere. They would put them in my body, in my arm, in my cheek, in my eye socket. And you can't do anything. And you're extremely ill from it. But you can't get sick. I wasn't able to even gag. And you can't feel the pain, but you can feel and you can smell. And just beyond my right shoulder, I could hear this very heavy, raspy breathing, and it was getting closer. And I couldn't turn to see, and I didn't want to see. But I knew that as soon as it got within my range of view, that what I had gone through up till then was absolutely nothing. It was absolute pure evil of some sort that was coming. And at the very last second, when I knew the very next instant it would be within my range of view, I opened my eyes and I was alive.
Tom Harper, Rhodes Scholar, theologian, and journalist, found when he was researching his book Life After Death that most people who have undergone near-death experiences claim to have at least started on the path to heaven. But there are others for whom the experience turned intensely negative. Hellish, in other words.
Not long ago, my wife and I attended a church service in which the preacher declared in no uncertain terms that only those born again in Jesus would be spared eternal damnation. Afterwards, I told him I thought he had a rather narrow view of heaven and hell. "I do indeed, brother," he thundered at me. "I do indeed." It was obvious he felt we were headed in different directions.
Maurice Rawlings, a cardiologist in Knoxville, Tennessee, has been on the front line in operating rooms where he has seen numerous people die and revive. He says we are not hearing about negative near-death experiences because no one wants to admit they've been to hell and back.
Unless you're on the floor with the patient resuscitating, at the time, the heat of battle, at the time of their experience, why are you fighting me off, John? What do you see? Is there fire down there? Is the devil there? What's there? Then it all comes out. It's not sublimated into painless portions of the memory. You've caught them red-handed. They can't deny it. It's there. The negative experiences are always been there. They just haven't been captured because the psychologists, psychiatrists that interview these patients for a living, collecting cases of after-death experiences, haven't resuscitated one of the individuals they're reporting. How is somebody going to report a negative experience when they won't even tell their family? It's an F on the report card.
Ron Regan spent a good part of his early life stealing, extorting, and beating people up, until the unlucky day he came out at the bottom end of a fight, slashed by a bottle and bleeding to death in an ambulance.
And I didn't know what was happening. I thought the ambulance was on fire. And as it filled with thick black smoke, moving through the thick black cloud, almost like a opening in this thick blackness. And at some point I began to hear screams, multitudes of people screaming and wailing. And the best way I can describe it is it looked like a volcanic crater. And I could see like a huge lake inside this, but it was blazing with fire. I'd never seen anything like this, with the exception of hundreds of gallons of gasoline poured on the surface of water and ignited. But even worse than the sight, I began to see and to know that these voices were coming from those flames. And then I began to see bodies, silhouettes of human beings screaming, on fire, burning, but they weren't burning up. They were in an inferno of flames, but they weren't burning up. And they were screaming, and the smell, if you've ever smelled burning flesh, it was unbearable. And the screams were unbearable, but the most horrible thing was the pain, the emotional pain of loneliness and separation. And I saw other people, and they're saying, "Ronnie, don't come here. There's no way out."
Ron Regan became a Christian minister, preaching the gospel from his own experience.
Well, I have nothing against becoming a Christian minister. After all, I became one myself. But I have to admit that many researchers in the field of paranormal experience see these kinds of claims as culturally determined.
Darkness, void, vacuum, loneliness, absence, nothingness, non-existence.
What I knew was that I was outside of the hospital, going into the sky.
Nancy, you never existed. You never will exist.
35 years ago, Nancy Evans Bush may have experienced the kind of hell referred to by Stan Groff when something went terribly wrong during childbirth. She has been trying to make sense of what happened ever since.
You're not real. You never existed. Nothing you ever knew existed. You're not real.
You never existed. You never will exist. Nor does anyone you think you ever knew, nor your life, nor where you live. You made it all up. You were allowed to make it up. Which meant that not only did I not exist, I remember saying telepathically, but the baby doesn't exist. Her year-old sister doesn't exist. your mother, your husband, nobody you know exists. You're not real. And nothing you know is real. I've called it instant Holocaust.
Nancy believes she has come to terms with the hell she experienced so many years ago. But what about those people whose near-death experiences threw them into hell and who found no hope, no redemption, no promise of anything better, who came back to this life with the sense that all they have to look forward to is perpetual misery?
There is a gift in these experiences. Now, it's not a gift we want to get. But if we're stubborn enough, and for some of us this is the only benefit we've ever found for our stubbornness, but if we hang in there, we work through a lot of issues. We come to discover our religious faith in incredibly deep ways that we couldn't if we just kind of dazzled around on the happy level. So what I'm trying to do is go beyond just the idea of pain equals bad, equals punishment, equals hell, equals eternity, equals despair. Because the alternative to despair, I think, is joy, which is different than happiness. But the paradoxical nature of this is that in order to get to real joy, we have to be able to accept suffering as part of it. And I know that sounds bizarre, but I didn't make up the rules. And it just seems to work that way.
In many ways, the concept of hell is the most difficult of all ideas of the afterlife for contemporary people to deal with. All of us have had moments of pure happiness or supreme exaltation about which we can truly say it was heaven. But hell is a different story. When we say something was hell, we don't mean it in quite the same way. Implicit in our idea of hell is the potential and the need to be released from it. When they made a movie about the most decorated soldier of World War II, they called it To Hell and Back. As far as I know, nobody's ever made a movie simply called To Hell, which is probably what's most nerve-wracking about hellish NDEs, that uncertainty about escape. Nancy Evans Bush, like any believing Christian, finds reason in her experience by affirming that only through suffering comes ultimate joy. But what if, as some hellish NDEs seem to demonstrate, it doesn't? A troubling question. And to be candid at this point, until more research into hellish NDEs has been done, I'm perfectly content not to know the answer.